There's a place he comes to me. Though I'm blind, he helps me see. Though I see dimly in this place, one day I'll see him face to face.
This is Kurt Kaikkonen, pastor of Calvary Chapel, Waterford, at your neighborhood church. Today on Face to Face, we'll be in the book of Joshua. So grab your Bibles and let's get started. If you want to hear this complete message in its entirety, go to yourneighborhoodchurch.com, where you can download Your Neighborhood Church app at the App Store.
But before any lottery ever takes place, Caleb, he comes up to Joshua because he's not interested in getting his inheritance from any kind of lottery, because he has a promised inheritance. And that promise for his inheritance, it came from the Lord directly through Moses himself. Because Caleb, the son of Jephunneh, the Kenizzite, it says he wholly followed the Lord. And so that says that Caleb was very faithful. And that phrase, wholly following the Lord, well, that's repeated 6 times in the scriptures. And so you might want to think with Caleb bringing this up here that he's kind of bragging here, but he's not. He's really not. He's only quoting what Moses said about him. And the promise that Caleb received was that he would receive that land where his foot had trodden. And we're told here that Caleb, he's 40 years old when he was sent out as a spy, and that he was a representative of the tribe of Judah. And what's interesting here is that even though Caleb is from the tribe of Judah, he is also called a Kenizzite. And that's a Kenizzite, and that's from being on his father's side. And Kenizzites, they were native people from the land of Canaan. And you kind of find them listed over there in Genesis 15:19. So apparently, sometime down in Egypt, this family of Kenizzites became attached to the tribe of Judah. And now Caleb, his name here, it means dog, and he tells us that he's 85 years old. This is how we get our timeline for how long it took for Israel to conquer Canaan. Because him being 40 years old, and then you add the 38 years of wandering in the wilderness, and then you minus the 85 years for his age, it leaves us with 7 years. So Caleb, he has been waiting these 45 years for this promise of receiving his inheritance from the land where he trod to be fulfilled. And he's not going to leave it up to some lottery. And then we're told here that, well, like how Joshua, how he was old and stricken in years, and he's kind of getting a little bit frail. It tells us that Caleb's not, and that Caleb is as strong as he's ever been, and he's able to make war. And so he's kind of like Chuck Norris. He's been fighting battles his whole life, and he's not scared of anyone. And he's not asking for an easy piece of land so he can build his retirement cabin, so he can go out on the porch and rock. He's asking for the mountains where the giants are, who aren't conquered yet. And these are the same giants that he saw 45 years ago when he told Moses that God could conquer them and that they would be his bread. Well, Caleb, he's saying here that he's still hungry. And so Caleb is given what he was promised. And it was right for him to be the first in Israel to receive his inheritance. And so he's given Hebron, which used to be called Kirjath Arba. And Arba is the name of the father of Anak. And Anak, he's the father of the giants, the Anakim. Right, so after Caleb's taken care of, the lottery begins. And Judah, being one of the larger tribes, it receives the first lot. And he's the big winner here. And so he gets that large area in Canaan. And so it's basically the whole south, between the Mediterranean Sea all the way to the Dead Sea. And it just happens that the tribe of Judah receives the territory where Caleb, who is also of Judah, where his inheritance is, because his inheritance is Hebron, which happens to be in Judah. So that all kind of worked out. And then we get to another story about Caleb where we hear about how he drove out 3 sons of Anak, and it gives their names. And their names were Shisha and Abedman and Talmai. And they're mentioned all the way back in Numbers 13:22. So that was when Caleb originally spied out the land. So those 3 giants, they have been here this whole 45 years. And Caleb, he's been waiting to get at these guys his whole life. And now Caleb, he's 85. And so I'm guessing that these giants, they might be 85. But I don't think that Caleb was chasing them around in their walkers. And then it mentions these same guys when you get to the book of Judges chapter 1. So these are famous giants. And then Caleb, he goes and he makes this really strange promise to give his daughter away in marriage to whoever can be the one who can conquer this other city of giants called Kirjath Sepher, which is later called Debir. And the way I see this story, and I'll admit to you, it's not right, but what I think is like, okay, well, hey, Caleb, you're 85 years old. So how old is your daughter? I mean, is she like 50 or 65? So I'm really kind of wondering, well, what kind of prize is this? But I'm sure she was a beauty. And though it might be kind of odd thinking to us, but you're kind of thinking, well, what is he thinking? I'm going to give you my daughter if you can go get me some more land. But I don't think that was Caleb's motive here. But I was thinking I could probably give away Salem if I could get someone to clean the garage. If I could do that, then we might be able to make a deal. But I really don't think that this was Caleb's intent at all. I think what he's trying to do here, that he's actually trying to take care of his daughter. And it's maybe more like, if you want to marry my daughter, this is what you're going to have to do. You're going to have to prove yourself worthy. So the way I think of it probably was more like if someone wanted to marry one of our daughters, well, and the man you'd want to marry your daughter would be one who would have a good job, or a job, or they would have the same beliefs that your family believes, that they have the same values. Where this man here, he would have the same beliefs that Caleb had, about how Caleb thought about God, where that through God's help, I can fight any battle, that all things are possible with God's help, because that's how Caleb believes. And so the great winner of this great prize of marrying Caleb's daughter, Akshah, was Caleb's very own nephew, Othniel, who is the son of Caleb's own brother, Kenaz. And so you can see here that he came from a really good family. And this actually became a very, very good choice, because we will see him later in the book of Judges, because Othniel becomes the very first judge in Israel. And then it looks like for a wedding gift that he had given his daughter Akshah a field for a wedding present. And she seems to know her father pretty well. And she also knows he's kind of generous. So she approaches him and she asks him for a spring too, because she wanted a spring to be able to water her new field. And what it looks like to me is that Caleb, that he's doing everything he can to be a blessing to his family. Because when you are 85 years old, you really don't need that much more stuff for yourself. But as a good father, you always care about your kid's future. And so she asks him for a spring of water, but he gives her 2 springs. He gives her the upper and the lower springs. Okay, and so the rest of chapter 15, it goes on, and it continues to describe the inheritance of the tribe of Judah, and then it talks about the cities that they inherited. And when you get down to verse 32, it says that there are 29 cities. But if you read the text, you'll see that there are 36 cities that are all named. And what they think this is that they probably included some of the villages that were actually outside of the walled cities, which made the count up to the 32. And then we're told in verse 63 that Judah didn't drive out the Jebusites out of Jerusalem, and that they still dwell there until the day that this book was written. And they will still be there until the time of King David, hundreds of years later, where he will drive them out with the help of Joab, the commander of his army. And so the thought here is that they could have driven them out. But for them to drive them out, it would have been hard. And they just found it easier to live with them. And then we get down to chapter 16. And this is the other one of the super mega lotto winners. And it's the tribe of Joseph. And where his children, who make up 2 of the tribes, and they're the large tribes of Ephraim and half of the tribe of Manasseh. And with these 2 combined, they are larger than all of the tribes in Israel. And then chapter 16, it describes all of their lands, and they receive this really beautiful piece of property, which is centrally located in Israel. And in Ephraim, that's where the national headquarters will be, and it'll be in Shechem, and that's where the tabernacle of the Ark of God will stand there for over 300 years. And then when you get down to verse 16 in chapter 16, we find that Ephraim, that they didn't drive out the Canaanites in the city of Gezer, and that those Canaanites, that they still dwelt with them until this day, which is that same day of when this book of Joshua was written. But then you read that Ephraim made them forced laborers. And what that tells you is that they could have driven them out any time, but they didn't want to. And so they didn't obey God in this, and because they're thinking that they know better than God. And you have to remember that Gezer here from last week was one of the cities that Joshua had already conquered. And so for Ephraim, this was economical, and it made sense for them to keep them. But the truth is, if you can make somebody your slave, that means that you can probably drive them out of your land. And what we're going to see that happens when we get to the book of Judges, that these Canaanites in Ephraim, that they will actually become stronger than Ephraim, and they will make them forced laborers, and Ephraim will continually have problems because of this compromise that they made with the Canaanites. And then chapter 17, it goes on and it describes the other half of Manasseh's land, their inheritance on the west side of the Jordan. And then in verse 3, we hear about this man from Manasseh whose name is Zelophehad. And this guy, he had no sons, but he had only daughters. So these daughters, they go to Joshua and the high priest, and those girls, they go and they remind Joshua that the Lord commanded Moses to give them as daughters an inheritance because they were daughters of this Zelophehad, that God had already judged us, that they shouldn't be left out because their father only had daughters. And so they received an inheritance in Manasseh, but there were some restrictions that came with it, that they couldn't marry any men outside of the tribe of Manasseh, and if they did, they would lose their inheritance of property.
You've been listening to Face to Face. Face to Face on this radio station has been provided by Your Neighborhood Church. If you want to help support Face to Face and put this program on other stations just like yours, you can contact us at yourneighborhoodchurch.com or write Your Neighborhood Church, P.O. Box 500, Romeo, Michigan 48065.
There's a place he comes to me. Though I'm blind, he helps me see. Though I see dimly in this place, one day I'll see him face to face.
Tune in again tomorrow at this same time as we continue to go through the Bible.